Previously on Mr. Forth Programming. And now I'm looking to do a cleanup pass, and I have a couple things in mind that I'm specifically thinking of doing during this cleanup pass. Level of rigor to it, same kind of idea on the writer, except the opposite problem. I want to make sure that when I'm writing a WAV file, I'm doing the most work that I can to fill out all of the fields so that I can be interpreted by just about anything correctly. I also want to take a look at the design. And then finally, there's just organization. The parser stuff is looking pretty good. I think I'll wrap it up here for now, and next time I'll do the same kind of pass on the wave rendering code. And now, alright, I'm picking up again on the second pass over the wave code. This time I'm focusing on the wave rendering code. Taking a quick look at what we have so far, I think the place where I want to get started is working on the API for the wave render call. I've noticed a few things about it that make me uncomfortable. The parameter block is a little bit complex, and I'm wondering if that's as good as it's going to get. And there's this spot here in the middle of the function where I welded in an interleave buffer, or a buffer interleave operation. And that scares me a little bit. That seems like the kind of thing that could become a problem later, because this is assuming that now anytime I ever render out one of these files, I'm going to do this interleave work, and there's no way I could choose to avoid that unless I duplicate my wave rendering logic. So I kind of want to make sure I've pulled out the expressions that describe how to render out a wave file in such a way that it doesn't force me to also use this interleave. So because of these things, it just seems like the API is the biggest sore spot on this particular part of the code, and I want to work on that for a little while and see if I can come up with something better. So let's get into that. Alright, the first thing I did there was hoist out that interleave operation from the guts of the wave render function, and I think that was a pretty good call. It was not very painful, pretty easy to get that to just transition over to a slightly different factorization, and now we don't have to do both of them together. There's these two separate paths, and the user can compose them if they want to, so I think that's good. One experiment I decided to try was to fuse my bit size and my kind into one field. The main thing I was thinking here is that there are a lot of invalid combinations when I have them as separate fields. Like I couldn't allow a 31-bit float, I don't think. I don't know what that would mean. So instead of having a bunch of invalid combinations and validators, I decided to just define the set of valid combinations as one type and see if that flows better. I think it's a little bit nicer. You know, I'm only using this for the render parameters right now, and it might extend to have more uses later, and then it might make more sense if it was a little bit different. So we'll consider this an experiment that we're keeping an eye on over the long haul and maybe tweaking in the future. But I like what this looked like so far, so I'm going to do it this way. Another thing I took a quick look at is the channel masks. This was a feature I tried to play with earlier when I was learning things. I probably didn't do a good enough job of playing with it because I realized when I was working on it just now that I can't actually get any effects from twiddling with those masks. It seemed like if I only had one channel with audio, that it would always go to the left speaker no matter what I did in terms of masks there. There might be something I could have done to make it work better, but I wasn't finding it. And I also found that if I just put zeros in the rendered file, it still just worked. So it seems like maybe this is a feature that's just getting ignored by the Windows player at least. And I'd rather not theoretically have a feature in my code that I can't actually test or see any effect from. It just seems like I'm putting an effort to try to design an API for a feature I don't even know how I would use because I don't have an example of where it matters. So I just took it out. It's not in the rendering API anymore. I might put it back in the rendering implementation just for the robustness pass, but it's out of the API now, and I think that that's the right call. With all of that, the parameter block is much tidier now, and I'm pretty happy with it. So I think that the API pass is pretty much good. And what I'm going to do next is get on to robustness. I already touched on this a little bit because of the experiment with the kind field, but there's still plenty to do. So I'm going to do a second pass over this now to make sure that all of the little to-dos here and there that will make the code more robust have been handled and done something simple to make them clean too. All right, let's do that. All right, cool. That function is looking pretty good at this point. All of the to-dos have been eliminated and it's all sorted out into nice tidy blocks so that future maintenance will hopefully be pretty easy. So I think that's in pretty good shape. One thing I started thinking it might be good to have is a helper for serialization. This isn't going to be the only serializer in the code base. And if I had a good helper for it in the base layer, then I could use that as the interface. So I would return the thing that that helper says to return rather than a string. So I could, for instance, avoid having to glue all the memory together in one buffer at the end, which is what I'm doing right now. Thing is, I don't really want to go down that path yet. So I'm going to put the serialization helper idea onto the to-do list for future arcs. All right, now before I wrap up this video, there is one loose helper. It isn't actually part of the Wave API, but it's a loose helper that we threw into the code to test things out, and it might be nice to actually keep that one around. So I'm going to organize and tidy up that function real quick in one go, and then we'll be done. So there's one last thing I thought I should do to wrap up this cleanup pass, which is I recall having a to-do list that I started for things that needed a cleanup or things that were starting to worry me during the learning phase. The thing is now that I took a look at the list, we kind of already hit all the things that I was worried about. I did the swizzle functions, made them a little better, fixed up the naming schemes, and figured out the API stuff. So I sort of didn't use this list to remember to do this stuff, but I ended up doing all the things I wanted to do anyway, so we can check these off. All right, so that feels pretty good. We ended up doing some cleanup, and now we can move on to the next phase of audio stuff.